those who feel like even as allies, they don't really have a voice at that table, I would say the thing that people were trying to tell you was don't speak over them. Don't ignore them and push your own agenda when you're talking about things.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Murray. Welcome to another edition of Break the Wheel. I'm your host here today with Bontle Senne, CEO of Deji Digital. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Great to have you. Well, we're going to dive right in to uncork and unwind. Today's wine is from Texas. And speaking of Texas, I thought this was interesting. The University of Texas at Austin laid off around 50 employees from diversity, equity, and inclusion programs due to compliance with Senate Bill 17, which bans DEI offices, programs, and training at public universities. You have any thoughts on Senate Bill 17?
As someone who is not American, not living in the US, I'm in the UK and I'm South African, it feels a little remiss to be commenting on legal topics in the US. But what I will say is it seems to be part of a broader trend that we're seeing in terms of organizations, nations, governments, etc., taking a hard stance on EDI at the moment.
I love that comment. And, as we've been diving in, I'm recognizing, I think in terms of folks that we've talked to that have had an international background, I think you're one of the few. And it's exciting because I think there's a unique perspective that you have to offer. So have you not been seeing, I guess, as much of this attack on DEI outside of the US, or do you see that it's a trend, at all in your neck of the woods where it's kind of on attack, or what's your observation locally?
So I think there are certain topics which are just hot button topics in the EDI space. One of them, of course, is trans rights. And we've seen a lot of politicians try to make talking points of that, which is super interesting to me because I think most people are honestly do not care about trans people. They're like, you do you, I'm going to do me, let's carry on our lives. Can we talk about cost of living? Can we talk about not being able to buy apartments? Can we talk about, healthcare, those kind of things. And so I think in the UK, we're definitely seeing rumblings, but they're definitely around one or two specific issues and not around the whole suite of EDI.
That's very interesting. Yeah, so I, as a gay person, and living in San Francisco, I think every day I see, and I kind of live and breathe the an environment where it's definitely something that's talked about quite a lot. But I echo the sentiment in general of kind of the freedom of just, a you do you approach, and that there are so many other topics that may be worthy of the time that we spend on air. So that resonates with me quite a bit. So excellent. Well, then let's jump over to the HR News Flash. So this one I think is actually applicable around the world. One of the latest HR catchphrases, which could have big implications for everything from employee engagement to retention and recruitment, it's been dubbed Quit Talk. And it happens when employees use TikTok to release covertly filmed resignation meetings or terminations. I've seen a few of these. They can be quite interesting. The Quit Talk hashtag is now more than 108 million posts on the app, with some videos gathering over 20 million views. Any thoughts on what employers can do to prevent this kind of negative brand image getting out there?
Two thoughts. One, which is the not so serious one, which is don't have terrible exit interviews or firings that people find amusing enough to make TikToks about. There is that. But the second one is, we're definitely in the space where brands in general have less control over what is said about their brand. They're in the conversation, but they're not starting the conversation. And so they shouldn't think of it like advertising that they can control and say, you can't do this, you can do this, but rather as something that they can engage in a conversation about. They could make it amusing. They could release their own exit interview things. They could reflect on them and do kind of a post-mortem, let's say, TikTok video analyzing what went wrong and what they may do better. There's so many ways you can do it, but trying to shut it down probably is the worst possible response.
It's totally great. It reminds me of the, the Streisand effect, right? That when you try and shut something down, then it just ends up garnering more attention that way, right? I think we've seen that play out in the public eye quite a bit.
Yes.
Fascinating. Well, jumping into the reality check, this is your guest spotlight. So, Bontle, I'd love to hear, when we got connected, I thought, this is so interesting. Your background is unique, and I thought it'd be really interesting to have you on the show. So feel free to share your reality check. What does your reality look like these days, and the things that are kind of top of mind for you that you think our listeners would value from hearing and learning from?
I am in an interesting position because I've had roles my entire career in digital and transformation and in HR people topics. And the intersection of all of those things is kind of my sweet spot. So I guess the reality check for me is, again, the intersection of all of those. The first one is you don't have a seat at the table without data. Right now, we see a situation where HR professionals, people professionals, are being laid off as some of the first teams that are going alongside, some ad teams, media teams, D&I teams. And I think it points to people not really understanding the strategic importance of HR. And sometimes that's because HR itself does not have the data to be able to justify its importance. So when they're having at the boardroom table, the CEO is asking questions about, what is the impact of AI on workforce planning, for example? How do layoffs correlate with revenue and employee satisfaction during, the same periods? What are the trends in regretted leavers and department productivity? They want to understand what's the ROI from the things you're doing from a people perspective. The data is really difficult to collect, and I've had to run a people analytics team. It was not fun, but it certainly is worth putting the effort into, because the richness of the conversation you can have is so much better, and you will then always be the person that people look to in the room to give them a different perspective and one that's evidence-based. The second thing, as my
value,
yeah, add the value. The second thing, which is my reality check, is also that, on this point of data and information, you can say a lot of things about D&I and EDI. A lot of people, though, to be honest, don't really know what they're talking about. There is this idea that just because I'm Black, I should somehow be an expert on Black topics, whatever those may be, or a woman or queer, etc. I'm lucky that I belong to pretty much every diverse group that is possible. So I can speak at length on all of them naturally, but that's not really the case. And I think what happens is that as HR professionals were saying to ERG leaders, like, you are the race ERG leader, so you should be the expert on race, and you are the women, so you should be on women's, and you are the veterans. And the reality is that I don't believe in the idea of breaking into ERGs particularly, right? I think that if it's not intersectional, it doesn't really count. And I'll explain this with data. So recently, in the building of DejiBot, which is our AI coach that we have for manager capability building, I was trying to understand the kind of questions that managers in the UK typically ask. So what are they Googling, basically? And the drop-down thing that gives you all the other associated questions, etc. So you can get one of those services which gives you keyword search, and you can search for those things. And I thought, okay, so something I've heard at town hall meetings, something people have asked me privately, how do I manage Black people, right? So I put that in. What came out as the answer? How do I deal with insubordination? How do I deal with someone who thinks they're better than they are? How do I deal with someone who's disruptive on the team? How do I deal with someone who can't take instructions? Can I sack someone, fire someone for being annoying, right? That was the dozens and dozens of those, almost not a single, I don't remember seeing a single positive question that was associated with that, to which, of course, I was a little concerned. And so my immediate next thing is like, okay, so this is one data point. Let me check what it says when I say, how do you manage women, for example? Do you know what that said? How do you empower women?
Friends.
How do you make sure that women feel supported in the workplace? How do you make sure women shine and get, the right feedback and coaching and support? It's super interesting, right? Not because of what it says about what we believe about Black employees or women, but because I'm a Black woman. So which ERG are you going to put me in, and how will you treat me? If you see me first as Black, then you will see me as assertive, aggressive, talks too much, thinks she's better than she is, etc. If you see me first as a woman, then suddenly I'm inspiring, I'm a leader, I'm taking charge. And the thing which I think is the reality check for anyone who's interested in advancing talent development or EDI in their workplace is, if it's not intersectional, it probably doesn't count, because the more we try to break people up into different kind of elements, it's super hard to do. And I don't think it actually serves those people, because what you want is not to ignore other parts of their identity to focus on one. Someone's talking to me and they're going, I'm talking to you about being a queer person. I'm like, that's cool. But can I not comment on being a queer person who's also neurodivergent? Can I not talk about the experiences of being an immigrant in this country and be, queer, right? And also acknowledging there's different levels among those, and it doesn't make anyone better, doesn't make anyone more deserving of support than anyone else, but it certainly gives a better richness to our understanding of the things people are going to. And I think is also more validating for those people as well, to acknowledge that, my experiences as a university educated woman with a master's degree will be very different from the experiences of the same woman who is comes from a different socioeconomic background, has a different immigration status than I do. We're still both Black women, but there are some things that give me privilege that do not give her privilege. And not being able to understand the difference in those power dynamics is really damaging, because you'll end up treating both of us the same in an organization, which you shouldn't.
That's fascinating. It reminds me that so often in public discourse like this, we tend to be very reductionist, or, focusing on a specific, whatever that is, right? A specific race, a specific gender, a specific, group. And yet we are so complex in that regard. And how we are seen oftentimes can be, very one-dimensional, right? I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, I, as a white man, feel like I don't know. I have very little that I feel like is even appropriate for to add to the conversation. And yet, I'm neurodivergent, I'm Hispanic, I'm gay.
I have so much to say about that, though, right?
Sure, say. I want to hear.
Okay, 3 truth bombs then. How very consultant of me. I think that if we ignore intersectionality, then white men have nothing to contribute to the conversation. But the thing which I always say is that we make this thing of saying these are diverse people and these are not diverse people. But if you are queer, that is some element of diversity which comes with bias, which comes with privilege, which comes with discrimination. If you are an immigrant I think this also applies in the US to some extent, but in the UK and the North, if your accent sounds like you're from the North, forever people will treat you worse, and you will always have poorer job prospects. So people move to London and intentionally change their accent so they can get to a more Queen English, because they know that will give them discrimination. So if you are straight white man from the North, I'm like, you know what it feels like to be discriminated against about something that you cannot change about yourself, that just happens to exist, right? ADHD, and other forms of neurodiversity. Again, many more people have those than are willing to say. And we also don't want to out people for whatever their disability, sexual orientation, etc. is. And so I don't think we want to live in a world where we say, because you look like this, you don't have a voice here. I think we want to live in a world that says we are all diverse by some degree. There are things we can do to help all of our lived experiences, and they're good for all of us, because solving the fact that you might get discriminated against as a gay man in the workplace, by the way, also helps me if I was a straight woman, right? Like, it would be very helpful to know, oh, okay, so no one's going to be discriminated against. Our pay will all be equal. No one's going to try and out me for whatever in the organization. That benefits everyone. So I kind of like the idea of saying to those who feel like, even as allies, they don't really have a voice at that table, I would say the thing that people were trying to tell you was, don't speak over them. Don't ignore them and push your own agenda when you're talking about things. They were not saying you don't have a voice at the table. And I don't think they were saying that your help is not needed, because at the end of the day, I remember being an exec in the HR team of a really big corporate company and talking to 2 straight white men who basically said, we need more people that look like you at the top before we can really start the change. To which I said, 1, some of my biggest coaches, sponsors, mentors were white men, by the way, and those were the people who helped pull me up in organizations. But 2, you're never going to get more people that look like me if you are now jumping out of this and saying, none of this is my responsibility. It has to be for people like you, right? And that's forcing me into more emotional labor to try and fix things that, by the way, you could be helping with.
Isn't that interesting? That the burden that sometimes gets placed on those that don't necessarily deserve or want that burden, but just because of how they're seen. I think that's a fascinating thing to bring attention to. Well, with that, I'd say it's a great transition to this next segment. People misunderstand. So what would you say do people most misunderstand about either yourself or your job or the space that you work in, or even something that you see often every day?
Ooh, interesting. I was thinking about my job, and so I guess I'll get to that one. But actually, when you talk about the thing that people most misunderstand about me, um, I think that people think because I speak a certain way and my background looks a certain way that I'm a certain sort of person. I'm sounding more and more American the longer I'm staying in the UK because I listen to so many audiobooks because I'm neurodivergent and like to be
Nice.
alone that somehow it's kind of happening. But everybody thinks I'm putting on this accent so that I can sound American for some reason, which is really weird. And I think the other thing that I always find interesting is that people want to make assumptions about which part of my identity matters more to me. But if you had to ask me,
Mm.
like, what's the hill I'm going to die on in terms of my identity, I will say neurodiversity. Because
That
while
is fascinating.
systemic institutional racism and sexism affects every aspect of my life, the thing that makes me have a meltdown in a shopping center is because I'm autistic. It's not because I'm a Black woman. And so my everyday lived experience is more actively impacted by being neurodivergent in ways that my dating life and other things may not necessarily be. And I've ended up in really awkward and difficult situations simply through being neurodivergent and not knowing the parts that you were supposed to take in that moment, and you're off the script, the social script, and it's very confusing. And that gives me a lot of anxiety in a way that, I'm happy to be a woman. I'm comfortable with it. I like my sexuality. I love being Black. All of that is so chill. And, we can talk about interpersonal or institutional forms of discrimination. But I'm seeing a lot of the fetish over neurodivergent people. Like, oh, get someone who has ADHD. They're so creative. You can hire them in a creative job. Or get someone who's autistic. They'll be great in tech. Their minds were great in tech, right? And I'm like, okay, again, I'm both of those. But there were very strange assumptions that you're making about this whole group of people and what they most value about themselves. Because there's probably some autistic dude out there who's like, you know what? The thing that matters most to me is that I'm Hispanic, or whatever, right? Like there are layers to it.
Yeah.
So that one is
It's so funny. The exact example that you just mentioned is, I don't even know if you probably have no idea that how close to home this hits. But so I was diagnosed, so I'm 40 now, and I was diagnosed at age 38 as autistic. And it was a huge enlightening moment for me that explained massive amounts of my childhood and, the whole thing. Right. And just by pure coincidence, because, as I'm white, I'm certainly white. However, I have a very large affinity to my Hispanic identity, and I actually just swore in this a week or two ago to be a citizen of Spain, because I've been working for about 6 to 7 years on my Spanish citizenship through there's a Sephardic Jew heritage program. But I was born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I had 18 years there, and so like the Hispanic part of my identity was actually a very large part of my identity for a very long time. So just, I don't know, by pure coincidence or magic, but the example that you just gave, you really nailed that one with me.
I'm
That's
hoping that
amazing.
universally everyone will be able to find some portion of that they go, you know what? Actually, if someone were to ask me, I would probably say this. The thing that
Absolutely.
people most misunderstand about my job is because I work in generative AI and because I am trying to use AI as a tool to essentially help managers have a conversation with someone to ask the terrible questions they may want to ask in a non-judgmental, safe space. So, for example, can I touch your hair? Just ask the bot that instead of asking me that. And it would do me a lot of good, right? And also you, because you get to have a good conversation, ask your questions why, etc. And then when you and I have a conversation in person, all the better. The thing that people misunderstand is they think that means that I want to replace coaches, HR people, managers with bots, that I think that's a good idea, which I do not, incidentally. I think this is a useful supplement. It's a useful tool in the same way as Microsoft Word or emails or whatever is a tool. But I think that we need to be very careful when we start to talk about AI replacing jobs and when we start to think about how it's going to impact the workplace. I've always said that for people who are excellent at their jobs, maybe AI is not going to be that much of a game changer for them, right? It will save them a bit of time, but they could have done that thing themselves anyway. For people who are bad at their jobs, this is a chance to level up massively and get to kind of the average. And for people who are average at their jobs, this is a chance that they get to get a little exposure and get on that high potential route, right? Potentially, right? But there is no version of the world where we can fire all software developers who are junior software developers because AI writes better code. Because in 2 years' time, we'll be like, cool, so who's going to update the AI's code? Oh, wait, we have no software developers, right? And this is going to happen in multiple... I already see this happening. I can see companies going, oh, we don't need that grad program anymore. We're just going to use AI. BuzzFeed going, it's fine. We'll just use AI. We don't need any writers. But you do get to the point where you go, actually, this AI content isn't that good for lots of reasons. Maybe we should have a human to look at it and make it a little bit better. And then it reverts back to being a tool. So I believe in regulation of AI, and I believe that it's not here to replace jobs. And if we make it replace jobs, that is something we'll have to correct in the future, right? In the same way as everyone was offshoring to India and then suddenly it was like, oh, maybe IT services don't have to be offshore. Maybe we could hire those people and make them part of our culture and, also an option. I think the same thing will happen with AI.
It's fascinating. I think many of us, I imagine folks listening, they may have their own, for lack of better words, love-hate relationship with AI, and that many of us use it daily because we find that it's really helpful. And we're also seeing and reading the news and have the fears about, job displacement and, I don't know, flashes of the Terminator and, AI having all the nukes go off and everything.
Yeah,
I think
iRobot people want to talk to me a lot about, which is really interesting. I was talking to a real estate agent this morning and he was like, oh, that iRobot stuff. And I was like, no, I have no desire to do that.
It's hard to predict how the world is going to end up, 20, 50 years from now with AI. But I don't know. My hope is that it doesn't look exactly like out of some of these books that can be frightening. All right. Well, gosh, from a heavier note, let's jump to a little bit of a lighter note with one of my favorite segments, Break the Wheel or Break a Heel. So I'm going to give you a few topics. And in this case, the topics are the do's and don'ts of DEI. And we're going to talk about, you're going to tell me whether you think that this is break the wheel, it's innovative, it's great, it's positive, or break a heel, not so. So we'll start with the first one. You can add as much or as little detail as you'd like. So the first one is recruiting from a specific underrepresented group for a DEI program manager position.
Oh, break the heel.
Break the wheel or break a heel?
Heel, definitely. Again, it goes back to one, assuming that because someone is a particular group that they know stuff about that group or understand the history, the context, intersectional issues, etc., which they don't have to, right? We don't say like, oh, okay, you have an interest in Game of Thrones. You're now the head of Game of Thrones in our organization, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. The second part is that it's just a lot of emotional labor that they don't necessarily need to do. And they're the ones who are being discriminated against, experiencing bias, etc. It's a bit weird to make them be super nice to the people who are discriminating against them and try to, beg for their support and try to, encourage them, etc. I would rather have someone who is an expert and is okay to do that emotional labor and wants to do that with their life and career.
Makes sense. All right, next one. Copying what another company that you respect is doing to improve DEI. Break the wheel or break the heel.
Okay. So if it's good and it's working, then sure, go ahead. You know what? You can always, I don't know if there's any such thing as plagiarism in terms of EDI programs. So I feel like you could be like, you know what? I saw this brand. They were doing such amazing work. Let me make a TikTok about it. And then, do that same thing. I think that's okay. But I think it's really tough if you just sort of think someone's doing a good job and go, reverse mentoring. That sounds like a good idea when no, that's not a good idea. So both, I guess.
There you go. All right. Next, using hiring quotas to change the culture in your company.
That is a tough one. So for me personally, honestly, break the wheel. I think that having been involved in mergers, acquisitions, executive recruitment, L&D, etc., it's really hard to change the makeup of your organization with the people who exist in it. You kind of have to rely on a mix of just natural attrition and retirement and redundancies, etc. You can't make people redundant as a result of their whatever demographic or particular characteristic they have. And so your only tool really is at the recruiting stage. I'm not sure that I believe in a quota for the end result of the funnel, but I certainly believe that you should have a certain number of different candidates that at least the manager gets to see in a long list, right? Because what we understand is that usually it's kind of, there's a lot of applications from a particular group. Two of them make it to the long list, no one makes it to the short list. Okay. When you start to have those kind of rules in terms of who makes it to the long list and the short list, you end up having a much better throughput of people, and people go, oh, okay, right, okay. And even if they don't make it to short list, that's fine. But you saw 5 of the 10 candidates you saw could have made it to your short list and were adequately qualified and also were diverse. I think over time, seeing that more and more for a hiring manager, you kind of go, maybe that prejudice that I don't really want to talk about isn't so real if there's enough qualified candidates who at least make the long list and then the short list and then, the finals.
Fascinating. Excellent. All right. Next, writing policies to change employee behavior.
Break the heel.
Break the heel. Share more.
Okay, look, policies are really important. Don't get me wrong. I spend a lot of my time writing policies. Who reads these policies, by the way? Do you have your corporate policies on your phone that you can quickly refer to when something's going? Because I don't. It's one of the reasons.
Would you?
What? No, actually. But what I did try to do is I asked my developer who built DigiBot if he could make something where the bot could tell me the policy, so that I would just ask it what the policy is for a particular thing. And that's worked pretty well, because I'm like, I can't even find all the policies. They're all named different things. They all have different, it's too much. It's too much. I don't have the time and I don't have the mindset for it. And quite frankly, I have never seen a policy change anyone's behavior.
Hear that. Hear. All right. Next, waiting for your leadership team to embrace the need for diversity and inclusion at work. Break the wheel or break a heel.
Break the heel, right? And I think, honestly, as the demographics of our organizations change and there's more kind of Gen Z people moving into the workplace and more millennials are taking over, this is a great time for everyone to be like, we don't have to wait for the upper management to believe in this. We can have a grassroots movement in the organization. We can support each other in a different way. We can ourselves act intersectionally. And they're eventually going to figure out what's going on and go, that's really interesting. That seems to be working. We should also do that, and they take credit for it. So I would fully encourage people to, it's definitely break the wheel stuff. It's break the heel to wait. It's break the wheel to go for it.
Yeah. Don't wait. Just go for it. Love it. All right. Diving in next, we have the wheel breaker of the week. This week, the Lego Group will tie part of its salaried employees' bonuses to its annual carbon footprint beginning this year, the company announced Wednesday. Lego said it had established these performance metrics to motivate employees to help make a positive impact as the company aims to reduce emissions across its factories, stores, and offices. Thoughts on that?
Excellent idea. When I worked in investment banking, we did something similar with regards to women and the number of women who were working in the technology area of the bank. And magically, when it became the managing directors and other top execs, when it was part of their bonus, they found women who could code everywhere in the organization, who'd previously been put aside and gone, yeah, you should do the product route. You can go and be a business analyst. Now suddenly it was like, hey, you feel like being a software developer? So it's really interesting, and it changed in 3 months, right? So massively changed the demographics there. Even something like when they were trying to reduce outsourcing, right? Because they sort of went, we actually want for employee wellness to get a better culture, etc. We have all these outsourced roles in IT. We're currently 70% outsource. We want to be 60% insource. Make that happen. Within 6 months, it was done. all the
Wow.
challenges and problems and whatever that everyone had. They were like, forget that. I'm getting to 75% in-house so that I can get my bonus. And,
Mm.
unfortunately, I do believe that humans are inherently selfish and we are inherently self-interested. And I think that as a HR professional, you have to lean into that. So I'm really pleased that Lego Group is doing that. And I really hope others follow suit, because if you're creating the environment and the tools required for people to succeed, changing their incentives and giving them a compelling narrative, I feel like that's all the ingredients you need to make real change.
Absolutely. And, it's like there's no shame in being motivated by money. There are many
Oh,
folk who are,
yes.
and we're working for money. And,
I love my
you
job,
know,
but also I need to pay for my mortgage. So, you know, both
right.
of those things can be true at the same time.
Exactly right. I love that. Excellent. Well, moving on now, this is one of my other favorite segments. This is the What Should I Have Done segment. So, this is where I share with you a very brief story in my life and a choice that I had to make without telling you the choice that I made. And I ask you, what should I have done? And you tell me the choice that I should have made. And then I'll tell you what I actually did.
I love it. Let's do
Sound
it.
good?
I love it. Let's go.
Let's do it. All right. All right. So here's the situation. I was an executive at a startup company, which shall go unnamed. With actually, my boss was the CEO, and I actually greatly respected the CEO. I thought this person was thoughtful, engaging, great strategically, compassionate. Really cared about the team. All of the things that I would want in a CEO. Really, he was a truly wonderful leader. And this was a situation or a time, which actually I'll say in the US, but even internationally, like many political things are hot topics these days.
Mhm.
And there was a time when this organization was, we had a lot of very strong things happening politically in our environment in the US. And there were a lot of very heated conversations at work related to politics, and many folks got very, very upset by many of these conversations, and many conflicts ensued. But I'd say a lot of important conversations also happened, and so because of a lot of the the disruptions, shall we say, from some of these conversations, the CEO decided that he wanted to set a no politics at work policy, and asked me what my stance was on this, and then I had to tell him what my stance was. So and make a recommendation. So what should I have done in that situation?
That's a fun one. In Look, the first thing that I think of for me going into that situation, I would probably say, I completely see why you're trying to set this rule, and it makes sense. It's good that we're reflecting on this and able to have an open conversation about it. Thing number two is, practically, this is really difficult to enforce. We cannot find out what people are talking about at the water cooler. We're not, with them in the room, wherever. And so we're trying to have a culture where people are telling on each other, and, snitches get stitches is a real thing. So you don't want to put people also in a position where they're speaking up about things which might not personally affect them. It's just kind of like, oh, I heard someone talking about the politics of whatever, so I'm going to report them. I think what's a better approach might be, is what I would tell him, is think about what we allow people to say externally. So, please don't talk to our clients about that. Please don't put that on your LinkedIn, especially if we're paying for a premium account and you have, company branding, etc. Make it very clear that if you want to share things about politics, that's fine. Please do them only on your personal accounts that have no professional, link. And also be aware that our customers and clients may very well Google you. They're going to try and find you. They're going to try and find things about you. Be careful about the sort of things that you're showing them, because you don't have the opportunity to give the full context of your political beliefs. You don't have the full, ability to have a conversation with them. You can't explain some of the nuance that's in there, and they're going to have an idea about you, which may or may not be true. So the safer option is save those conversations for in person, in safe spaces with people who you trust, right? If you feel very strongly about those things, by all means, yeah, your personal social media, do it. Your personal time, that's awesome. But professionally, we want to have a nuanced opinion on this. That's super hard to do with one LinkedIn post. That's what I would say.
Fascinating. Makes sense. And
What would you say?
well, certainly the externally facing. Yeah, I'll tell you, because the external facing piece, what you shared, it resonates with me a lot. For me, what I was sitting on was, the reflection that I had was this something that stuck with me for many years. Was something that I read, and since I'm going to butcher the quote, I'll just kind of paraphrase the concept, which is the concept that neutrality promotes the oppressor, I guess.
Yes.
In a situation where group A is oppressing group B, or person A is oppressing person or group B, neutrality basically supports or enables the one doing the oppressing. And prior to me really understanding that concept, I think my thought was, just like avoid the drama, don't talk about these things. But post that, I've come to appreciate that there is a power in giving voice where otherwise there might be silence. And from that perspective, I think, it's hard to have a right answer about any of this. I think in us having empathy for one another, that like this is really, really freaking hard, and that there are pros and cons to whatever choice we make. I did make the recommendation that policy should not be set. I hadn't even thought about the enforceability piece of it, which I totally resonates with life. Like, oh yeah, okay, that totally, like, it's easy to forget when we enforce. It's like, come up with a policy. No, you got to enforce it too. But yeah, I thought, in a world where somebody is actually feeling, for example, oppressed by a certain action that is happening or not happening, being able to, or somebody that they know and they care about deeply, I think it can and should be fair game to vocalize and advocate support, even.
I completely agree with that. And the answer I gave is completely against what I personally would do, right? Because personally, I am the person who posts those things online on my professional platform and deals with the consequences later. But also, I'm a fan of Audre Lorde, the Black poet and intellectual. In one of her poems, I think it is, I have the quote somewhere back here on that big poster thing, is your silence will not protect you. And I think that's a really important concept, because sometimes people don't speak up because it doesn't impact them. But things have a real snowball effect real quickly. And suddenly it's not the rights of LGBTQIA plus people that they're taking away. It's now the rights of this particular racial group. It's now the rights of women. It's not, there is kind of a knock-on effect as those kind of ideas build momentum. So that's the thing which, when I advise people, they seek personal counsel outside of, the professional setting. The thing I always say is, if the reason you're not speaking up is because it doesn't impact you, your silence will not protect you.
Yeah, eventually they may come to your door next. Absolutely. That's heavy. All right. Well, let's lighten it up a little bit now with a new segment. Our next segment, horror story of the week. So we're going to dive into a story that might have been a little bit, could have been scary, humiliating, frightening, horrible, whatever comes to your mind. Tell us your story.
Okay, I think this I did not take literally, clearly, because my story is from 1980, actually.
Okay.
So some people know this this example of McKinsey in the internet era and with mobile phones, right? Are you familiar with the case?
Feel free for the audience, whether independent of me.
Cool. I will say as a disclaimer, I'm ex-McKinsey, so I do understand this. Me sharing the story. In 1980, AT&T came to McKinsey and said, hey, this mobile phone thing seems like it might be kind of a big deal. Can you do some forward modeling or whatever to find out how big this is going to be? The McKinsey team went back into their team room, did the things, made the pages. I'm sure the slides were made by hand then, whatever. Handed it to the CEO and went, mobile phones are only going to be 1% of a future technology market, and there's going to be 900,000 max in the US by 2000, the year 2000, right? Which obviously turned out to be very incorrect, because it actually ended up being 109 million people that had mobile phones in the US, never mind the rest of the world, by 2000. And everyone mocked and ridiculed McKinsey endlessly for this because AT&T pulled out of the mobile market for, a decade plus because they were like, McKinsey said it's fine, so I'm sure it's fine. But it was not, right? And if you think about the amount of money that they did not make, the amount of jobs that were not created, especially since AT&T was actually at the forefront of telephony and a lot of the stuff with mobile. So they could have really gone in there. They could have been BlackBerry. They could have been iPhone, right? But they weren't because, McKinsey was like, don't worry about that thing. And this for me it's a horror story of diversity, actually, because when we talk about this case as McKinsey alumni, it's always talked about in the context of that's what happens when you don't have diversity on teams. Because the team that went in to give that advice was all the same dude wearing navy blue trousers and that suit jacket, maybe with pinstripes, maybe without, who went to an Ivy League university and probably is going sailing this weekend, or maybe, to watch some polo or lacrosse, whatever it might be, right? But it was a certain privileged class of people, all had done MBAs, finance degrees, that kind of thing. That was the accepted makeup of what the team should be. And the lesson was, if there'd been anybody else in that room, they may have been able to say, hey, but there's a lot of people who don't have landlines, for example. Maybe they'll want to use mobile phones. And there could be some applications for business people who want people to be available all the time. There could have been some other perspective in the room. And so that's why going forward, that's the lesson they always had. It's like, we don't do diversity and we don't have diverse teams because it's fun or it's cool or it's a trend or whatever. It's because it genuinely gives you better answers and helps you stop making very embarrassing mistakes that, a good 44 years later, we still think is a horror story.
I love that. It's like a McKinsey horror story. Do they tell folks when they join, like, don't do that?
Well, no, but they do tell you that people will bring this up. A client inevitably at some point will bring this up as a reason to say, like, you guys don't know anything. So by the way, the answer is, we did learn from that. And the thing that we learned was, don't have a team of 4 straight white guys from an Ivy League university. Mix it up a little.
I love that. Well, the next time that I'm talking to a client that's thinking about pulling in McKinsey, I'll be like, ask them about the mobile phone thing from the 80s. I love that. See what they say. I love that. No, I love that. I did not know about that. And I think it's fascinating and entertaining as well. So it's great. All right. Jumping next to the wobbly wheel of the week. So, according to a recent study from the University of Chicago, Microsoft is seeing a pronounced exodus of longtime and senior personnel to direct competitors due to their mandated return to office policies. Microsoft is now facing significant costs in hiring and training their replacements, along with the competitive costs of losing operational knowledge. What are your thoughts on that?
Good for Microsoft and any other organization who's trying to force people back to the workplace. This is a hill that I 1000% will die on because I don't believe everyone should be forced either to work remotely or to work in the office. I feel that there should be some level of individual choice. I feel the teams should have a conversation about where it makes sense for them to work and when they want to be together. Because walking into an office and seeing everybody with their headsets on and they're all in a separate call at their laptops does not make any sense to me. I'm like, I could have been home doing this. Like, I didn't need to be here. I could have been wearing my pajamas. So I genuinely believe that if you care about inclusion, if you care about people who need more flexible work schedules, because not just because they have kids or whatever, like maybe they want to go to the gym. Maybe their mental health depends on it, right? There are many reasons people want flexibility. And we also saw in the COVID time, people worked harder when they were remote because there's always this voice in the back of your mind that's going like, oh no, I'm stealing time from my employer and I bet I can't have this coffee, right? Whereas before you may have been talking to someone and it's fine and whatever. Nah, the kitchen's right there. You're getting your sandwich, you're eating it at your desk, you're working until 7 p.m. because you don't have a commute. So... sorry, Microsoft. This one, I still want a job one day in the future, please. But I think This kind of serves you right.
Just working from anywhere. No, this resonates. And I think we've talked on the show many times about, the problems that it introduces that actually, in particular to those maybe could be working women or working mothers or working parents, who have certain challenges for which, that freedom, it introduces problems that are DEI related, and also the research. This professor Nick Bloom that I've mentioned before, I've met with before. He shares regularly on LinkedIn. That it is really interesting that when we hear leadership and executives talk about return to office, so often they talk about kind of like sort of these philosophical concepts of why they think it's better. And yet, like when you actually look at the data and the research, it just doesn't back up anything that they're saying, which I think is fascinating.
And I think in reality, as much as we talk about people who are parents, the reason I use an example of not parents is because I was like, it's not just an excuse when you have kids. But the other thing is that the disabled community, right? Disabled people have been telling us for a while, hey, it would be really cool if we could access this event, but we can't because it's inaccessible. Magically, when it was COVID, it was suddenly possible to do video links for conferences, et cetera, right? And that enabling people who cannot leave the home for whatever reason to still participate, still have gainful employment, whatever. And that one for me is, even if you don't want the flexibility stuff, even if you believe that's all crap and your time is your time, what about a whole generation of people that you are missing out on? Generations worth of people anyway that you're missing out on, simply because you refuse to make accommodations that you made for everybody else literally last year.
Isn't that funny? Very interesting. All right. Jumping next over to HR Speak Funny. All right, today's word of the week is workfluencers, employees who film themselves working and uploading it on social media sites like TikTok and LinkedIn and other platforms. Have you ever worked with a workfluencer before at your workplace?
No, I haven't. But I also think that no one would probably tell me if they were workfluencer because I would probably have this kind of response to it. I think the content creation in of itself is like a full job, and people do not realize the amount of work and effort and research and whatever that goes into creating content and podcasts and things. And I've done a lot of that for my own business, and I get it. And so the kind of random TikToks of people walking around the office doing weird stuff, I'm like, that's cool, but nah.
But nah. I was just reading today something about, I guess, the millennial pause. It's like something that Gen Zers and younger don't have this, that when you start recording, you just immediately go into it. But the millennial pause is, I guess, that we pause for a few extra seconds once we press play, because it's, I don't know, something that reflects us being old and, not with technology or something. I don't know. Something I just read. Millennial pause.
I actually did, when I was recording my podcast, I'd always wait like 2 seconds before I started speaking.
Boom.
I don't know. There was something about maybe it's the intro sound or whatever that I thought if the jingle's on, they won't be able to hear what I'm saying. I don't know, but I feel personally by that.
It's like dots and thumbs ups. Now we're getting canceled. Wild. All right. Next section, decline to comment. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and you can pick one to decline, but you must answer the other 2. And, of course, I won't make anyone do anything, but the spirit of this is to do that. So we'll dive into this first one. So you can either answer or decline to comment. The first is, what is the worst mistake that you have made in your professional career?
Oh, easy. Once I was doing a project in a hospital. It was one of South Africa's biggest public hospitals, really under-resourced. Everyone's really stressed there. I was based in the operating theater, so the OR, and I literally would wear the things and sit there and work at my laptop, in the matron's office. And I was supposed to be there to build a dashboard that would show them waiting times for surgeries, in particular things like cardiac surgeries, because if the waiting time goes on too long for cardiac surgeries, they tend to not have people to operate on, if you know what I mean. So it's very important that you make your way through that list as quickly as possible. And I went, in all my youthful wisdom, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. This hospital doesn't have enough paracetamol. They don't have a clear view of their stock or their linen, which is not just the bed stuff. It is the hat and the stuff they wear and the shoe booty things. Their linen is being late from the laundry. This is so terrible. I'm going to fix this. Me and by myself. I'm going to do a stock take. I'm going to buy them a washing machine. I'm going to call the procurement department and shout at them. I just went on this rampage. The partner on the project was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm doing what's right. I'm standing up for what I believe in and helping the public service. This stupid Excel dashboard is not going to do anything, right? So that was super fun to deal with that. The other team on the project was working in the pharmacy, and they decided to do extreme makeover as part of a lean operation in the pharmacy. So we spent a weekend scrubbing, painting, putting up new signs, whatever for the pharmacy. It was beautiful afterwards. And on the last day of the project, I went to the matron and said, it's been an honor working with you. Sorry that I spent 2 days building a dashboard 2 days ago and it has a macro and it's already broken. My bad. But I did all that other stuff. So we're cool, right? And she said, actually, I would rather have the makeover. And that, never have I been more, I am not that smart. When you just have this moment where you're like, wow, everyone was telling me don't do that, and they were right, and I was standing up for my morals, whatever. That is the biggest mistake I've made, because I could have had a really good impact on that client. I could have done something that, would have lasted them. I could have done something better than a crappy little Excel spreadsheet. But I thought I knew better, and I thought that I would go in there and fix all their systemic problems because, obviously no one here is smart enough to do that for themselves. And I never, ever made that mistake again of imagining that I was smarter than anybody else in the room.
That's very interesting. I resonate with the, that idea of justice and fairness and doing the right thing, and that can really take over, and yet sometimes it can, it's not always suck all the oxygen out of the room at times.
Yeah. It's not always the right way. So I don't think it's
fascinating. I love that. Oh, that's a good one. All right. Next, which celebrity business leader do you dislike the most?
Oh, easy. Elon Musk. That feels like an unfair question in the year 2024 because there's so many to choose from, but Elon, I feel also as a South African, I feel particularly upset that he gets added to our list of exports. I'm like, focus on Charlize Theron. Cool. Mandela never goes out of style. Elon Musk, I think he thinks he's American now, so we're cool with that. You can keep him.
I love that. Whenever sometimes my partner and I, when we're chit-chatting, and we see something unusual or something, and we go, we instead of saying for each their own, I always say Charlize Theron, because it's just what we say. So
see your export wine.
There you go.
Charlize Theron.
Love it. All right. Last, what is the biggest waste of time that every HR team does?
Oh my goodness, decline.
Good choice.
I was like, I hope the last one is something I don't want to answer. And it really is. So.
Oh, good. Well, that worked out. That worked out quite well for you.
I'm so happy.
You definitely nailed that one. Awesome job. Well, Bontle, this has been wonderful and amazing to chat with you. I think it's been enlightening to get your perspective. Actually, of all the things, again, in terms of having a perspective that we have not yet had on the show, an international perspective, a perspective from the UK and South Africa and everywhere where you've been and everything that you've seen, I think it's been particularly wonderful to have that perspective. But in addition, the intersectionality of every other place that could be intersected. There are so many wonderful ones that it's been great to hear about. So with that, I'm going to cheers to change with you. So a new report from IWG reveals that HR leaders in the US agree hybrid work arrangements lead to happier, more loyal employees. Surveying 500 HR professionals, IWG found that benefits include increased productivity, 85%, better employee wellness, 85%, improved mental health, 88%, and enhanced learning and development opportunities, 81%. IWG CEO Mark Dixon sees hybrid work as essential for future-proofing businesses, emphasizing its role in improving productivity, culture, and collaboration while attracting top talent. And with that, cheers to change.
Cheers.
Bontle. Wonderful to connect with you. I wish you the best and more thoughts and voices and wisdom such as yours. We need more folks like you in the world. So thank you for participating. And
it's been a delight. Please invite me back and send me wine, maybe.
Maybe I will. Maybe I will. I got one right here from Texas. All right. Have a good one. Cheers.
Okay, bye.